Okay, so tonight we're going to be continuing in the Aleph Beis with Rav Kook with Os Gimmel. Now, just like with Os Aleph and Os Beis, we're going to need a little bit of an introduction of sorts to properly understand what Rav Kook is coming to do with the Os Gimmel. Now, as an introduction to the introduction, I guess, Gimel is the first letter where singularity opens up to multiplicity. As we'll see, the Os Aleph represented, as we spoke about, the Koyach HaGvul Bebilti Gvul, the original capacity within the infinite to manifest infinitude. But as we stress from the Leshem and from Rav Kook and from Rabbeinu Azriel and from the Arizal and from all of our tzaddikim, the Koyach HaGvul, in spite of the fact that it's limited, Klape Ein Sof itself, it still has the valence, it still has the nature of infinitude because it's so lofty, it's the lowest aspect, if you will, of the infinite. So klape us, vis-a-vis our perception, it's the loftiest place. So although Aleph is the first inception point of counting, or something that can be captured in number, or even in the realization that we can't truly grasp it with language, which is still a certain level of language, although a non-linguistic form of language, rather a wondrous type of expression, the Pella of the Aleph, in spite of that, it's still infinite klape us. Now, the Os Beis, as we discussed last week, is the first instantiation, the first inception point, the first manifestation of the Kli, of the Halal HaPanui, of the vacant space, wherein and in which the Koyach HaGvul, the capacity towards limitation, can begin to manifest. And we spent some time discussing what Rav Kook describes as the different partitions of the Os Beis, the partition on top and the partition on the bottom, which need to be strong in order to block out the Or Ein Sof, as well as the thin parochas, if you will, the thin line on the right side of the Os Beis, which is there to ensure that even the remaining light that enters into the space of existence not be strong enough to the point that it overwhelms the Kalim themselves. But as it stands, the Os Beis is simply the preparation for Kalim. The Os Beis is not a Kli itself. It's the beginning of multiplicity, the entry point away from Aleph into the space of the many, into the space of limitation, into the space of duality and duplicity and klipa and shvira and all the things that we associate with shnios or duality in the world. Now the Os Gimmel, if the Os Beis is the potential of the Kli, is the Halal HaPanui, the space of the vessels, then Os Gimmel is going to be the vessels themselves. And here it's important that we stop for a second to understand what the vessels actually are. Last week we spoke about how the vessels are nothing but the residual lights themselves that have kind of contracted themselves and congealed into a certain remainder that can no longer return back to the infinite source. But here we're going to be talking about real Kalim that actually begin to be meaningful within the system of the Arizal, within the system of the Mekubalim, in terms of being the corollary or the oppositional factor vis-a-vis the Orot. So we have Orot and we have Kalim, but by the Os Gimmel, we're going to start actually finding Kalim doing their job properly, not still in the space of kind of the paradoxical being both a Kli and not a Kli. In Os Gimmel, we're actually going to find a physical Kli, the manifestation of vessels. Now, here we have to come on to the major question that the Arizal asks in the beginning of Eitz Chaim in Shari Gulim V'Yoshar, and he also deals with it in Shar HaKlalim and Rav Chaim Vital's compilation of his notes. But the simple question is, why did Hashem create the world? Right? So we know how Hashem created the world, Kaviyachol, from Eitz Chaim. We know that it was through tzimtzum, through this paradoxical act of contraction that was for the sake of disclosure. But the question is why? Meaning from the point that Hashem allows us, so to speak, to try and understand the impenetrable will of the divine, the kad salit birusa, as the Zohar describes it, this irrational, unconscious will of godliness, kaviyachol, that arises out of nowhere, this kind of autogenesis that is not inspired by any external inspiration, by any external factor, but rather arises from within itself through the inner sha'ashua, through the inner movement, this josians, if you will, this movement back and forth, to and fro within the individual, to the point that it's ola me'atzmo, umine ubei, kavyachol, as the Svarim tell us, Hashem creates the world without any secondary cause of his will. So here we have to try and understand why Hashem did it. And the Arizal offers two answers. The Arizal offers one answer is described in Igulim V'Yoshar as being Hashem, so to speak, has certain capacities and potentia, has certain shemos, has certain to'arim, certain ways that he wants to interact with human beings through the aspect of malchus, of kingship, through the aspect of rachamim, through mercy, through the aspect of fear and judgment and fairness. Hashem, so to speak, wants to be able to interact with his children, wants to be able to interact in the world through all of these different valences and veils and guises and facades that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the capacity to be mislabesh in. And the Arizal says, based on the Zohar and Parshas Bo, that the purpose of the creation of the world is in order for the world to know Hashem through all those valences, through all those different forms and manifestations and shemot and names and particular modes of governance that Hashem interacts with the world through. So in order for Hashem to do that, he needed to create a world, Kavyachol, because Ein Melech B'lo Am, there is no king without a nation, and without otherness, without separation, without differentiation, there would have been no place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to interact and play this game of being. So the Arizal and Igulim V'Yoshar describes the fundamental purpose, the why of creation is so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could fully manifest himself, Kavyachol. And the Ramak and the Rambam and the Rebbe Rashab in Hemshech Samech Vav deal at length with the theological and philosophical difficulties of such an idea of implying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is chaser kavyachol, that he lacks something without being fully manifested in the present. But that as it may, we're deeply aware of the fact that Hashem wanted, so to speak, to reveal himself in the world in order that the Jewish people should recognize him. Later on in Eitz Chaim and Shar HaKlalim, the Arizal says something else. The Arizal says a more familiar idea that we're familiar with, which is that the reason Hashem created the world was because of chok hatov lahetiv, that the pure nature of good, the pure essence of good is to do good for other people. And the truest form of good is for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be able to be mashpia, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be able to express his goodness and his capacity towards goodness to creatures other than him. So Hashem, so to speak, created the world in order to be mashpia tova on a person. And here the Ramchal becomes very important, because the idea in the Ramchal is that in order for human beings and creation to receive the good in its fullest form, to receive the good in its fullest capacity, they need to be able to do it through their own volition. Based on a Gemara in the Yerushalmi, which describes the production of certain plants that up to a certain year are facing their mother plant, and then at the point of maturity, that plant turns away from its mother. And the Gemara has a lashon there where it says that from here we learn that a person who receives a gift, an act of grace from another person without truly deserving it, is embarrassed to look the other person in the face. That on a certain psychological level, on an anthropomorphic psychological level, Hashem understood that human beings need to earn through their own volition, through their own bechira, through their own free will, the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has prepared for us. And therefore, in order to ensure that human beings have the capacity towards choice, towards bechira, like we spoke about last week, that there is no bechira without a beis, there is no bechira without choosing one or the other and making a difficult decision. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to apply a certain level of concealment and differentiation and separation so that human beings will operate within the necessary concealment, the necessary hester, so that the choices that they make are difficult enough to be ola as if they were our own choices. So according to the Arizal and Shar HaKlalim, we have a secondary reason for the creation of the world, which is ki chok hatov lahetiv, that the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give over to human beings is one that is contingent on concealment. And this is where the Kalim really come into play, that in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kavyachol to fully carry out the plan, the original plan, the first inception of the thought of God, if you will, of creation, there needs to be the necessary mechanisms of concealment so that the individual can pierce those veils and choose through their own volition, through the hester and the hastir astir and the concealment and the double concealment, to still choose, in spite of it all, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Ramchal makes a big asek out of this in his Perush on Otzros Chaim. He brings up the fact that the Arizal brings down two different reasons. The first reason, as we discussed in Igulim V'Yoshar and Eitz Chaim, is going to be that in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be fully known in all of his potential, there needs to be others. There needs to be an Am that is able to be Makabel the Melech. And in Shar HaKlalim, what seems to be a machlokes, according to some people, which is that the reason Hashem created the world is Kicho Katov Lahetiv, that the greatest form of good is a good that can be earned. And in order for human beings to earn it and not be overwhelmed by the explicit presence of God, there needs to be a necessary form of concealment. So the Ramchal in his Perush on Otzros Chaim, in the back of Ginzei Ramchal, put out by Rav Yosef Spinner and Rav Chaim Friedlander in the green volumes, the Ramchal quotes both reasons, and he says the main ikar reason is the second reason, which means Kicho Katov Lahetiv. And for the Ramchal, that's one of the fundamental bedrocks and foundation stones, or Evan Shisiot, of his entire system, which is basically that all concealment, all hester, all pirut, all secondness, all duality, all distortion, all suffering, all personal suffering, is all for the sake of eventually revealing the greatness of the choice that we made in history to still believe in God in spite of it all. And in the future, Be'ezras Hashem, we will receive a gift of tenfold the amount that we would have received had we not had to choose. For Rav Kook, as someone who fully and fundamentally follows the Shitos of the Ramchal, at least according to Rav David Cohn the Nazir, in the back section of Kol HaNevuah, the Nazir stresses at length how Rav Kook simply claimed to spread out or explicate the right of the Ramchal. Rav Kook sees the formation of Kalim, this first instantiation, this first inception point of actual vessels that will now conceal the light of unity, that will conceal the Pele Elyon. Rav Kook sees this as a purposeful act, a purposeful minimization and concealment of divinity in the world for the sole fact that human beings need to earn it and reveal and disclose a deeper level of Kedusha and a deeper level of Emunah. All Hester, all kalim, all containment, all limitation, and as a result of that, the symptoms that come from there, which are the suffering, and which are the pain, and which are the sveikos, and the bilbulim, and the anxiety that every individual experiences throughout history. The entire purpose of all of that is so that human beings can earn the good that they deserve, which in the future will be revealed to be the greatest level of good, unimaginably greater than good that would have been exposed had there not been Bechira. And this is the foundation point for Rav Kook in the letter Gimmel, that the process into actual Kalim, the process into concealment, appears at first glance to be a descent from unity. It appears at first glance to be a traumatic fall away from the clarity and the unity of godliness before the creation of the world. But in reality, when a person penetrates the ideas enough, they recognize that it is a yerida l'tzarech aliyah. It is a shvira al manas latakin. It is a traumatic break in order that the person repair themselves, in order that the person work through their issues and eventually come to find their experience to be one of greater intensity, greater severity, greater veracity, and greater connection and dveikus HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That without the vessels, without concealment, without Hester, without Galus, there would have been no capacity to touch this level. One of my favorite teachings is brought down from the Baal HaTanya in the name of the Baal Shem Tov on the pasuk of Kain Bakodesh Chazi Sicha Liros Utzcha Uchvodecha, the song made famous by the Admorei Chabad. And the Baal HaTanya says something nifla in a few words. He says, Kain Bakodesh Chazi Sicha, that so too in the time of the Beis HaMikdash we should perceive you. The Baal HaTanya reads it as Halavai Shebizman HaBeit HaMikdash Kayim Zochim liros ta kamosharinu begalos. Halavai, it should only be that we should be zochet to grasp you when the Beis HaMikdash is built on the same level that we were capable of grasping you in the time of Galus. That there is a certain necessity, a certain intensification and potentiation of the religious experience, dafka in the makom of darkness. Daika, as Rabbi Nachman would say, afal pikein, as Rabbi Nachman would say, specifically primarily in the spaces of concealment and distance, that's where a person has to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as we'll see, this is all deeply connected to the letter Gimel. We're going to read Rav Kook now. The Lashon in Os Gimel is very beautiful. It's a little bit clearer than Os Aleph and Beis. And we're going to stop at certain points where it appears to me, at least, that Rav Kook is utilizing external sources to kind of build his interpretation of the Os Gimel. Os Gimel goes as follows, and the words of Rav Kook should awaken that place in us that can only be awoken through the words of the tzaddik like Rav Kook. Acharei sheba'u hatochnim shel ha'havyut l'gvulam. Now that the content of existence, the content of beings in existence, all the different things, the objects, the subjects, and when Rav Kook says this, it's important not to get caught up in the poetic and even philosophical language of havyot l'gvulam, of existence into its limitation. What Rav Kook means when he says the coming of being and existence into limitation, he's talking about each of us. He's talking about each of us in our day-to-day lives, each Jewish neshama in its experiences, the ups, the downs, the positive, the negative, the sveikos, the vadai, the anxiety, the amuna, the bitachon, the shalom bayis, the raising children, the parnasa issues, the experience of galus. He's talking about every single aspect that the Jewish person will find themselves in. So these teachings, although the poetic nature of them calls for a certain klaliyut, a certain expansive and universal interpretation, especially when Rav Kook is writing in Galus and trying to find that salve for his neshama, trying to find the relief to his anxiety, kavyachol, it's important that we also try and apply, at least according to my humble opinion, that we try and apply some of these teachings to our own psychological mindsets as well. So after existence and being has found its way into limitation through the Os Aleph and through the Os Beis, ne'erachu hamishkalim elu keneged elu. The scales are weighed one against the other. Now here Rav Kook is describing something of a dialectical process which many interpreters of Rav Kook have seen, obviously not in the guise of Hegel's dialectic, but in a way that transcends and sort of elevates Hegel's dialectic. Hegel was not a friend of the Jews. Hegel couldn't truly understand the fact that we couldn't fully grasp HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He felt that that was a bad faith, so to speak, that any faith that can't fully seize and grasp what it is that they believe in, according to Hegel's dialectical theory, is going to be considered, a bad faith. And he describes the faith of Abraham as one that is perpetually deferring HaKadosh Baruch Hu, always saying that we can't quite grasp it. And lo yodea man nisnave, he didn't know what he was prophesizing at that moment, but if we look back at Rav Kook and Os Aleph, we see that that's very explicit what Rav Kook is trying to say. The godless of Am Yisrael, the godless of Klal Yisrael, is that we are deeply aware that we can't fully grasp HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that all of our language, all of our capacity to understand Hashem is dafka through Targum. So Hegel, in his negative statements about the Jewish faith and Avraham Avinu's faith, is in fact actually reasserting the value of our faith, in my opinion. So here, Rav Kook is saying that ne'erachu hamishkalim elu keneged elu. The weights are measured one against the other. Umitzius hamishpat, and the existence of judgment and fairness. Hagomel gemul shal mida b'mida above hiskale, that returns action for action, mida keneged mida, in a form of judgment that repays the actions done. That hanhaga, that ability of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create a space in the world where there's judgment and where my actions will be responded to with a like action, of tov v'ra, of good and bad, of schar v'onesh, of reward and punishment, of being held responsible, of being responsible for our actions. That is what is slowly now coming into being with the Os Gimel. Now, Rav Kook, when he uses the lashon of ne'erachu hamishkalim elu keneged elu, he's utilizing a very particular imagery of the scales. Now, if we look in the Tzafar Ditzniusa, one of the fundamental mishnos, really, of the Zohar of Kabbalah, now the beginning mishnah of Tzafar Ditzniusa reads as follows: Tana, Tzafar Ditzniusa, it's taught that the book of concealment, the book of modesty, the book that reveals that the entire essence of our faith is a faith of modesty that can't fully be revealed. Safar the Shakil b'Miskala. It is a book that is weighed. It is a book that is measured on weights. And the Safar Ditzniusa goes on to say, Tana, it's written in the Mishnah, Ad loy have mitkala, until the point that there was no scales, loy have mishkachen apen ba'apen. There was no face-to-face experience. And the Vilna Gaon, in one of his most famous svarim, which is his Perush on Safar Ditzniusa, the Vilna Gaon stresses in numerous places that these mishkalim, this mitkala is the Aramaic translation of a mishkal, which is a weight. This mishkal is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in the world a series of opposites. One side of the scale versus the other side of the scale. Tov versus Ra. Concealment versus revelation. Light versus darkness. The binary oppositions through which the entirety of existence operates. And until this mishkala, until this mitkala, until this mishkal, until this weight was set up, there was no mitzias of mishpat. There was no ability for a person to be bocher. The kalim had not been built yet so as to secure the necessary level of limitation so that choice is actually choice. And so Rav Kook here is coming to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu places this miskala, HaKadosh Baruch Hu places this weight within the world. And now that this weight is within the world, Hashem has the ability to be gomel gmul, which is melashon gimel. That gmul, which means repayment for our actions, is the same language as the os gimel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can now operate the world on a level of mishpat, on a level of starva onesh, which again only deepens our experience. Gam yita'er, Rav Kook continues, the os gimel also describes she'elu asher hayu kiyonkim mishtei ha'em, that those who were in the bechina, in the mashal of those who were nursing from their mothers, which again is connected to the os gimel, kishurim el hayesoid hamechaya bereishas l'skala shakolayesh, meaning those who were still nursing from their source, those who were still deeply connected at the stage of infancy when the next level of existence is too young, too immature to actually stand on its own, because it would be destroyed, because it would be overcome by Hester. So the child needs to nurse. The child is not independent yet. It's still dependent on its source. Kishurim el hayesod hamechaya bereishis eskala shekolayesh. The metzias, which is still connected to the foundation that gives it life from the beginning of creation. Meaning, Rav Kook is saying here that at this point, the os gimel, kalim, separation, the olam, melashon he'elem, the world from the language of he'elem and concealment, has not yet fully manifested into a place of maturity to stand on its own. That until now, until the os gimel, we were still nursing from our mothers. We were still dependently connected. We were back to back, so to speak, achor ba'achor, connected in a deep way, yet embarrassed to look our source in the face, embarrassed to have a face-to-face relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, like the Safar Ditzniusa says. Rav Kook goes on to say that over here in the os gimel, nigamlu v'na'asu omdim b'tochen miyuchan la'atzmam. They wean themselves off. Melashon gmul, melashon nigmal. Biyom higamal es Yitzchak. That Avraham Avinu makes a celebration on the day that Yitzchak is able to wean off of his hashpa'ah. That it's one thing to be dependent on the parent, dependent on the spiritual source. It's another thing to separate oneself from the spiritual source and then return face to face. We learn this by the Kavanos of Purim with the Nesira, that Dafka Bisman Hester, Dafka Bisman of the surgical separation between the parent and the child from that dependent back-to-back relationship. Dafka there, we have the ability to create a deeper relationship that comes from volition and that comes from a deeper level of the soul, which is why the Rebbe of Baruch used to say that a remes to Purim in the Torah is in the pasuk of Bayom Higamal es Yitzchak. Higamal is Osios Megillah. Because Dafkan Purim, we see in the Kavanos that there's an Asira, that the Jewish people are sleeping. And we lost that back-to-back dependency in order to re-enter into a relationship through our own will without kfiyah, to return face-to-face through our own volition, to choose it, and to reveal a deeper level of Kedusha. So over here, Rav Kook says by the os gimel, nigamlu v'na'asu omdim b'tochen miyuchad la'atzmam, that the kalim and existence are now weaned off of their original source of infinitude, and now they're able to stand on their own. Mitgadlim metuch yusam ha'idei tnuasam ha'atzmit ha'mechuvenet. And existence, if you will, and again, it's important to know that Rav Kook is not claiming, God forbid, that existence is now separate from God. What he's claiming is that this is the entrance, this is the entry into the place where God conceals his existence. So it's still present. The Tzimtzum is lav kipshuto. Even if you say that Tzimtzum is kipshuto, it's lav kipshuto, like the Leshem shows us. Even if you want to say it's an absolute removal, it's still not an absolute removal, like Rabbi Nachman teaches us in Torah Samach Daled, childhood, Bayal Paro, that at the end of the day, all we have is Amuna and Shtika, and we're the Ivriim who cross over this paradoxical question. That here, now we have the ability for existence to grow on its own. Megadlim metoch yusam, they grow out of themselves. Ayidei tnu asam ha'atzmit ha'mechuvenet, an essential and self-sufficient act. Atzmiut, personality, no longer dependent on the sources of our youth, no longer dependent on our parents, on kedusha, on things being absolute. But rather now in the space of suffix, we actually have the ability to turn and make the decision on our own. An essential decision. Liyot mekablem es hofa'at ha'ashpah haviatit mimakor ha'chayim haroshiyim. And here Rav Kook says that the purpose of the separation is not, God forbid, for an essential separation, but rather so that the individualized and now independent creature, the independent individual, the person who is no longer overwhelmed by the presence of the parent, by the presence of God, by the presence of Kedusha, but now lives in a world of suffix and self and ego and all the different vicissitudes of ego and all of the different concealments and distortions that we live with. Now we have the ability to draw forth from a deeper level of Ein Sof. We have a deeper ability to draw from the deepest place within ourselves a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mechayim Haroshim, from a place higher than the Os Beis, from the Aleph itself, Kavyachol. Memromim, Rav Kook says, from the lofty heights. Me Eloi Hadargos. And here Rav Kook is now going to get into the Tochin, into the shape of the Os Gimel, and it's kedai to do a short introduction because this is going to be a recurring theme in the way that Rav Kook shows us the Osios. Based on our Mekubalim and even based on Chazal in numerous places, the impression is that the Osios themselves are simply built on the connections between Vavs and Yuds. Vav being a line or a kav or a ray, and the yud being a point. Now the point and the ray being the two simplest modes of geographic space and diagrammic space, these serve as the basic building blocks. But for Rav Kook, it's not only a geographic or an architectonic shape, but rather it's endowed with a certain spiritual capacity, that the vav represents a hamshacha, a kav, a connection, the vavei ha'amudim, a connection to something from one level to another. So it already represents relationality or the relationship between one thing and the other. The yud, on the other hand, in its self-containment, the smallest point on a graph, the point which contains the all, which in its minuscularity, in its minimal nature, contains everything within its infinitesimal infinitude, within the smallest irreducible place. So the Vav and the Yud represent, on a certain level for Rav Kook, different manifestations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Vav is more of a contained connection between explicit levels, and the Yud is where the levels are all contained prior to their actual manifestation. So this is going to be an introduction that we're going to go over in numerous places, because most of the letters are going to have this relationship that Rav Kook sees between the Vav part of the letter and the Yud part of the letter, on the Yud part of the letter. Me Eloi Hadargos ad Tachtius, from the loftiest level to the lowest, Yardu Hamitzuyim Kifitoar Hachelek Shel Hatzura Havavit Shel Haos. From the loftiest space of creation, from the Aleph, from the Pella Elyon, from the Koyach HaGvul Bebilti Gvul, existence has lowered itself, has descended ad Tachtitehem, to their bottom. Existence has lowered itself like the image of the Vav of the Os Gimel that goes from the top to the bottom. V'shiflus hatachtiyut, and at the lowest, degraded, lowest level of the Os, b'makom asher yitzaru v'yechshachu ha'inyanim ha'muzrachim b'midasam ha'yoter mitzumtzama. In the place where the enlightened and radiant aspects of spirituality, yitzaru, Yud, Sadi, Ayin, Reish, Vav, which means Atzur, which means stops, but it also means Tsar. Because the manifestation of spirituality into physicality, the limitation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence for Rav Kook, is both an act of stopping and containment, and at once an act of tsar, when a person, and an act of pain, of an inner pain, but a pain that's necessary, a pain that's necessary for growth, the Gimel, the weaning away from the mother, the movement from dependency into independency, from being consumed by the sense that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere and everything, and that everything is good, and entering into that lower space of doubting that, and sveikos, and a lack of emunah, and all the difficulties that we find in that place. A person now stops, and they also experience a tsar, And a person who reads Rav Kook's Chadarav, his personal journals, will see all over the place this tsar, this pain that Rav Kook both saw as painful and fundamentally necessary for the birth process of any spiritual growth. That in this place, in the Gimmel, those enlightened and radiant objects are now stopping and becoming darker. In their most contained, hayoter mitzumtzama, yachel haribui hamispari b'tzurasa hamugvala. Here, numerical multiplicity takes root. We're no longer dealing with 2. We're no longer dealing with 1. Now we're dealing with 3. Now we're dealing with a number that represents its own territory. 3 is a chazaka. Shin is, according to the Maharal, the highest level right before pure separation of the os taf. 3 is already difficult to identify the unified source within it. 2 is one thing because, as we said, the os beis is still contained within infinitude. The os beis is still at the level prior to actual manifestation of limit. But here in the Os Gimmel, we now begin to find 3, which is no longer containable, which is no longer explicitly unified. And we see the entrance of Haribui Hamispari B'tzuratza Hamugvala, the lowest level of numerical multiplicity. Because again, 3 is still the lowest number of it, but from 3 and onwards, and we'll see this throughout in Rav Kook, from 3 and onwards, numbers mean something different. 1 and 2 is one thing, 3 and onwards is different because there you're already dealing with a certain ribui that comes with kalim. The 3 here is explicit in the Arizal and in Eitz Chaim that everything in the world operates according to 3. We have chesed, din, and rachamim. We have yemin, smol, and emsa. We have ish, isha, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have shacharis, mincha, and marav. We have Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We have kohanim, leviim, and Yisraelim. We have Yisrael, Yishmael, and Edom. We have the 3 Batei Mikdashim. We have Tanakh. We have Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, and the list goes on. And we have Chachma, Bina, and Das, and everything in the world is now contained in 3. And that's where the concealment comes from. Because in reality, the 3 is really only 2, which is only 1. But as we'll see, that comes later on. But at this point in Gimmel, where the Kalim begin to manifest, it's difficult to find that. Hariboy hamispari b'tzuratza hamugvala. The numerical multiplicity in its limited form, b'tzura sha'atid laharot ribuyim she'en mekoram ha'achduti nikar bahem. A number that represents the fact that in the future, we will come onto numbers that will no longer have the explicit presence of unity in them. A person can find tough. A person can find 400 and doubt that there's the aleph there. But again, as we said in the beginning of the introduction to the Shirim, that through the Amunah that the Baal Shem Tov infuses into the Osios, it's important to remember that Tuf is nothing but the iteration of 400 alephs. But still, once we enter into the space of multiplicity for Rav Kook, we're talking about a place where in the future, as we move on from Dalet to Hey to Vav, v'chule, v'chule, so we're already entering into a space where unity is no longer apparent, which is why, as we'll see, Be'ezras Hashem, when we get to the Tagin part, the Tagin are those hooks that connect the black letter to the infinite space of the white space. Dafka the Os Gimel is the first letter that needs a tag, because Dafka the Os Gimel is the one that's most dangerous and susceptible to falling into duality, so it needs that extra hook. It needs that koach of Rabbi Akiva, who's Doresh, Kisrei Osios, and the Tage Tagin to recognize that even there we find Kedusha. Ekev HaGimel, the heel of the Gimel, Shebetoar Yud, that looks like the Yud on the bottom left. Shemage dak mechaber oso el achela katachtiti shalavav. That a thin and delicate connection connects this Yud at the bottom to the Vav. Hatiur asher lehispashtus shel hatzura hagashmit shebebat lechayim haragilim. Looks to us, and if you look at the letter, it looks like the hoof. It looks like the foot of an animal. It imagines, it conjures up this image for us of the regular and thick-legged animals, hamivata b'mara hagamal, that is expressed in the image of the camel. Gimel and gamal, again, are going to be the same word. Gamal, this camel, which represents this thickened animal, which represents the entry into a place of the midbar, into concealment, into heaviness. And Rav Kook goes on to say, Tziur hakvedus hagashmit v'hakamuta ava. The image of physical heaviness, the camel carrying its weight and thirsty and carrying all the burdens of the people traveling in the desert. The kamuta ava, and heavy quantity, again, quantity being connected to multiplicity and numbers, which is already a movement away from unity. So the Gimmel, or the bottom part of the Gimel, the foot, the hoof of the Gimel, that yud that pokes out from the bottom of the vav, for Rav Kook represents the camel. Tziur hakvedut hagashmit v'akamuta ava, this vehicle, if you will, that transitions from unity into multiplicity and into separation. Motza'es po makom litayr. Here, by the Os Gimel, is the only place and the first place within the Aleph Beis, after Aleph and Beis, that the camel and the Gimel finds its place to represent itself. Why? Why do we find here by the Os Gimel, by the real expression of kalim that are going to contain the light so that we can properly choose to find the light within the concealment? Why is it that that's synonymous or equivalent to the heaviness of the camel? And this, Rav Kook, goes back on what we discussed last week, where it's not a cause and effect wherein Hashem conceals his light and only then we find concealment, but rather the concealment of the light is the concealment itself, that the removal of the light is the giloy of the kelim themselves. And Rav Kook says it explicitly here, Ki yiridas hahagdaros hein hein hagormos lehiskalus hachomrius, because the degrading and the descent of the levels from Aleph to Beis to Gimel is in and of itself the cause of the manifestation of matter and kelim. Genizas ha'ekus hu goremes leskalus hakamos, the concealment of quality in its truest form, in the unified sense of quality, in the philosophical sense that the Rambam talks about it. The concealment of that quality is, in and of itself, the revelation of quantity, the revelation of difference. Shekiyata ora, the setting of the sun, mitzayeret hatamachshachim, is what forms the darkness. It's not that without the sun, then we find darkness, but the descent of the sun into concealment is, in and of itself, the birth of darkness. The degradation and the descent of levels from Aleph to Beis and the formation of the Kli for the sake of Bechira that we find in the Os Gimel is exactly what causes the heaviness of the Gamal, the heaviness of the camel. The Hagaron and the descent and the degradation and the subtraction, Mevi'et HaTosefet. And here Rav Kook is saying something profound that we don't even have nearly enough time to begin to discuss, but this descent of levels, this degradation into concealment from 1 to 2 to 3 brings in its wake an addition. It brings in its wake a deeper sense of multiplicity. Now we're going to have 4 and 5 and 6, and numbers that are adding upon themselves, complicating and concealing the simple unity. Here we find something deeply Rabbi Nachman-esque within Rav Kook, that the tachlis and the achdus is pashtus, that the one is pashut. Anything past the one, anything past the aleph is already the beginning of complications. And this complication of being, this bakshu chashronos rabos, this mistaken sense that we have that we need the complications in order to satisfy ourselves, hagaron mevias hatosefes, it's rooted in the garon, it's rooted in the lack, in the descent from unity. Shekol hamosif goreya, that anybody who adds is in fact attracting, because by adding we separate the simple unity that exists. But Rav Kook goes on and ends this letter with something very important. He says, although the descent of the levels and the manifestation of orot and kalim for the sake of bechira, for the mishkal, for the mitkala, for the mishpat, for there to be mida b'mida of ra and tov and an eitz hadas, tov v'ra, v'chule, and all of those things that are necessary to prepare human beings to be able to act on the stage of creation through their own volition, which implies a certain necessity of failure. Ein tzadik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yechteh v'chule. That this Yerida hazos, this descent, mevia hi gam kein es hahavta'a ma she'ein hamachshava habrura mirasha es eskalusa v'higlamusa. This descent, this degradation, this moving away from unity into multiplicity, into concealment, this moving away from or where there's no bechira into the space of choshech where there is bechira, this nesira, this separation which at first seems like a traumatic surgical removal from a dependent relationship towards a more mature, separate yet independent and fundamentally deeper relationship, brings with it a much deeper expression, an expression that the clarified thought, that all-encompassing thought, that infinite thought of the Aleph and Beis would not have allowed to be revealed. There needs to be a concealment, like we said, of the or, so that there can be a revelation of Metzias. If the or is too strong, then Metzias has no place to exist. The symptom was only for the sake of revealing existence. So the Gimmel allows us now to be metapel, to operate on a space or a field in creation where we can actually now engage. So this Yerida brings with it something that would have been unexpressible beforehand. It brings with it the capacity of Bechira. It brings with it the capacity of failure and in turn success. It brings with it the capacity of Sveikos and in turn a deeper level of Vade from within the Sveikos. It brings the possibility of Ra, but it also gives us the ability to transform and be mitkafeh and be mitapech the Ra into Tov, like the Baal HaTanya says. It gives us the ability to transform the Mariru into Matiku, to be the Balei Tshuva who operate within the space of concealment, dafka there, to show that Afal Pikain, even though it's Hastir Astir, and I'm screaming Aye Mekom Kavodo, even there in the Tachtis Atachtios, in the space of separation, I can still reveal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, something that would have been utterly impossible had Hashem not concealed himself. Gay, depth, omek, mal, dibor, speech. Rav Kook here is breaking up the word Gimmel. He's saying gay, which means depth, or gay hinom, the descent, the depths, which means intensity and experience, and negativity and concealment. Mal, language, speaking. Only through this amkus, only through this descent, only through this degradation of levels do we come to a place of actually beginning to open our mouths. Like we said, by the Aleph, there's no speech, there's only translation. It's too incomprehensible to open our mouths. By the Beis, we begin to get a sense that we can say something, that we're our own individualized creature. By the Gimmel, we actually begin to be able to speak. We're now nigmal. We're now removed and weaned off of our mothers, off of that infantile sense of spirituality. And now we actually have the ability to say something. Ke'ein hachashmal, and Rav Kook here is utilizing Kabbalistic Lashon, the chashmal that Yecheskel Hanavi saw, the klipas hanoga, which is like the Baal Shem Tov and Tzaddikim tell us, chash and mal, silence and speak. It's contained within one, that this chash, this chashut, the silence which gives birth to speech. Itim chashot v'ichin mamlot. Times of silence and times of speech. I want to just spend a minute mamish, because I like keeping the shiurim to 45 minutes, discussing other places that Rav Kook and other tzaddikim who learned from Rav Kook, or Rav Kook may have learned from, discuss this connection of the Os Gimmel and the notion of the Gamal and the notion of the camel, which represents a descent into Midbariyut, into the desert exilic experience of concealment, yet allows for an elevation that comes afterwards. Like the shape of the camel, which is ups and downs, that when you think you're going up, it goes back down again, but that descent allows for a deeper ascent afterwards. We find so often by the camels that we were zocha to the shiduchim of our avos and avos ha'olam. Now, for the sake of brevity, it would take a month to explain this, but Rav Kook in Olos Raya, in the back of Chelak Aleph, where he has his kavanos for Purim, there's a famous teaching by the Rosh Tevos Megillah, where he describes that Megillah is the same osios as Legima, which is drinking, and it has a connection to the Os Gimmel, and Rav Kook has an arichus there, where he talks about the association of the camel and the legs of the camel and the avoda of the camel to the avoda of Purim. But like we said, suffice it to say that Purim is the Nasira, is the time of separation for the sake of a deeper connection, which is the same avoda of the camel, which is representative of the descent into exile for the sake of an eventual elevation out of exile. Rav Hutner Zatzal in Mamre Pachad Yitzchak on Sukkos, in Maimer Mem Zayin, he says something as follows. He says, "Iefshar lanu kan lahagvil bli lagalot od marganisa," in the famous Rav Hutner-esque type of lashon, that we can't refrain ourselves from revealing a certain gift here. Hine ne'emar b'chazal, Chazal have told us, sheharoa gamal b'chalom, someone who sees a camel in their dream, misa niknasa lo, that a person was punished with death from heaven, v'hatzilehu mimenu, and he was saved from it. Hamakor, and this is in Brachos Nun Vav, Hamakor lezeh Gemara, the source in the Gemara for this notion is from the pasuk Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayim va'anochi alecha gam ela, that I am going to descend with you into exile. I'm going to create kalim. I am going to create concealment, but don't worry, I will also bring you out. And the Gemara goes on to say, according to Rashi, that the reason we can learn this about the camel from this pasuk is because the pasuk gam Allah also sounds like gamal, because the camel, Rav Hutner says, represents this descent for the sake of ascent. It represents the fact that in spite of the fact that there's an exile of kalim and multiplicity, we still have the ability to return back. And last but not least, here we're going to be looking at a Rav Nachum Mendel of Shklov, Talmud Mufek of the Vilna Gaon, in a few years, printing of Biurei Haramam to Osios. At the end of Os Gimel, he says as follows. He says, "V'zeh sod haroa gamal b'chalom." This is the secret of a person who sees a camel in their sleep. Misa niknasa, that they've been punished with death and they've been saved from it. Like the pasuk says, "Ein marin lo la'adam ela mehirhure libo," that a person in their dreams, in a deeply psychoanalytic type of interpretation, what a person sees in their dreams. I shouldn't say psychoanalytic. Freud took it from the Gemara. Freud took it from Chazal, and as Elliot Wolfson so beautifully depicts in his book on dreams. Ein marin lo la'adam ela mehirhure libo. We only show a person in their dreams what they've thought during the day. V'sod hachalom, and the secret of the dream is histalkus hamoichin v'hachachma, the removal of consciousness and the removal of spiritual awareness and wisdom. V'chein ma'aseh hadas, and doing anything with an actual conscious effort. V'lo nishar rak dimyon levad, and all that remains is the imagination. V'hadavik v'sharash, that remains connected to the individual and their source. V'zeh gamal, and this camel that a person sees represents the idea of gam, of also, l'rabos shenehafcha minachash lamata, that we've been able to transform the nachash, the snake, into the mata, like we know by Moshe Rabbeinu, the avoda of being mahapech, the nachash, into the mata, which according to the Vilna Gaon was the deepest avoda of Moshe Rabbeinu, to be mahapech tov and Torah. And this inyan of gam, which is the same osios in gamal and gimel, which is gam zulatova, that also that which appears to be a removal from the good is also good. And nacham ish gamzu, also this, and gam charvona zachar latov. That gam comes to show us that the addition, even that which seems like a descent, is in fact an ascent. And Rabban Gamliel was capable of saying Gamliel, that Hashem is also for me. And all of this is deeply connected to the Os Gimel and all the letters that follow, because this descent that we find now is only for the sake of an ascent. And the concealment that we're going to experience with the formation of the Osios all the way through Tuf are only there for us to deepen our experience and our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.